this is Dr. Scott Hoy. Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. Today I'm joined by Tina Gilbertson. Tina holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, and she is a licensed professional counselor in Oregon and Colorado. She discusses her new book, Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child, Practical Tips and Tools to Heal Your Relationship, published by New World Library. Tina primarily works with the parents of estranged adult children in her private practice. Tina and I discuss the pain involved with having an estranged adult child. We also discuss issues of attachment involved with this issue and ways to manage and cope with these difficult, painful relationship problems. I would also like to take a moment to thank you for listening to Kyle and I over the past year and a half or so. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review at Spreaker, iTunes, or your favorite podcast streaming service. It would help us out immensely. And now, here is the interview. Well, hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Tina Gilbertson. Tina holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, and she is a licensed professional counselor in Oregon and Colorado. Today, she will be discussing her new book, Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child, Practical Tips and Tools to Heal Your Relationship. It's published by New World Library. Tina, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate your having me on.
Oh, no, our pleasure. So, tell us a little about this book, or maybe the origin story, the beginning of this book. How did you come about? This seems like kind of a niche for you in your practice, and how did you come about or stumble on this?
Yeah, well, a stumble on it is really the right word, because when I started my practice, I discovered that I had a lot of clients who were not talking to their parents. Mm-hmm. And these were adult children. They weren't little kids. But they would say things like, I don't want to go home for the holidays, or I hate it when my parents call, stuff like that. And it became clear to me over time that the parents on the other side, whom I never got to meet, were probably confused and probably pretty upset by what was going on in the relationship, because it wasn't clear that they understood what the issues were that I was hearing about from their children. Mm-hmm. And so I started writing articles. Here's what you do if someone's not talking to you. And I started hearing from parent after parent, asking more questions and thanking me for the information that I was putting out there. Mm-hmm. So I became aware that this was a real deal. This was an issue that was not rare. And so I wrote in the interest of giving out as much information as I could in a concise way, I wrote a little PDF guide for parents of estranged adult children, and I threw that up on my website, and that was there for several years. Mm-hmm. And then I started hearing from people in other countries, is this available in my language? And so I thought, maybe I need to expand this and make it a real book and get it off my website and out into the world. And that's how Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child came to be. It was this evolution, this process of, wow, this is a big problem, and it's a bigger problem than I realized, and it really deserves attention. Yeah.
Well, no, it is. As I was relating a little bit earlier, I have run into both sides of the fence on this issue in sessions, and some very sad stories with parents of adult children that they just are so disconnected from, and it's so painful for them.
It is. It's one of the most painful problems that I've heard about.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, who is it that is estranged? What kind of a person might experience this estrangement from their children? Or, I guess we could speak also to the children who might be experiencing estranging themselves or separating with very strong brick wall boundaries between themselves and their parents. maybe first to address, like, what kind of a parent is this, makes this up, or what type of a person?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And you might think there would be a ready answer to that. And if there is one, I don't know it, because from my perspective, I have talked to many, many, many parents at this point, and it really seems to run the gamut. Obviously, there's much more to estrangement. I mean, I wrote a book about it. There's a lot that goes on with estrangement, but I do think there's an element of luck involved as well. It's not just certain types of parents who get cut off. You might think, well, it's abusive parents. That's who gets cut off. You abuse your kids and they grow up and they don't want anything to do with you. But it's not that clear cut, I have found. There are both abusive parents who enjoy doting adult children and parents who were very conscientious and really put a lot of thought into their parenting, and they find themselves cut off.
Well, no, go ahead.
I think there is also, it kind of depends also maybe to some degree on the reasons for estrangement, and one very common factor is the kind of normal need for autonomy and independence as the kid grows up and enters adulthood, and sometimes just that pulling away and that need for separation a little bit from the family of origin, that can create some friction, because here's these wonderful, loving parents who, and will say, our family was so close. We all got along. We enjoyed each other. We all went on vacations. We did this, we did that. And now this child who seemed so happy wants nothing to do with us. So I think in that case, the normal kind of individuation process is throwing a wrench into the works of the relationship.
Okay.
And so as common as it is, it takes a lot of people by surprise.
Okay. And so the parents don't want to separate. They have this kind of clinginess, maybe, or a perception of how things are supposed to be.
Well, I think if you talk to a lot of these people, they'll say, well, of course, my child needs to grow up and get a girlfriend or a boyfriend and have his or her own family, of course. But why can't they do that and still be in touch? Why can't they be independent and also answer my texts? So there is an understanding of the need for independence, but also a desire to be part of that.
Okay, so, right. But how much of this might be on the part, like moving to the other side of the coin, the adult child, how much of it might be that the adult child might have a misperception, or they have it in their head that they were treated poorly, or they didn't get X, Y, or Z from the parent? Does that ever come up? Like, do you ever sit in your practice and go, I think that there's something odd about this kind of perception of the parent that might be a little bit off or skewed, or, as I say, maybe magnifying the negatives and minimizing the positives in the relationship for whatever reason?
Yeah, well, sure. But underneath all of it, underneath the perception is some pain. Assuming it's not purely I need independence. Assuming that there's some issue in the relationship, there is some kernel of a need that did not get met, and of course that may create you never meet my needs. You always do this. There may be a perception that gets amplified, but I always want to look to the core of it, to the kernel. How did this start? How did this child get the idea that he needs to be hyper responsible, and this other child doesn't have that perspective on being a kid in the household?
Right.
How is that?
Right.
And I think it's very possible. I mean, it's common, say, for a firstborn child, for example, to be more responsible, to take more responsibility and feel more obligated than later born siblings. That's a pretty common thing. You've probably seen that.
Absolutely.
In families. Yeah. So different children can have different experiences.
Oh, correct.
And so I think when we talk about, the child is blowing stuff out of proportion, we have to ask why. Why are they doing that? And because you want to look for something that you can have an impact on. If this has nothing to do with you, if your child is just crazy and seeing reality completely wrong, then you have no chance of having an impact on the estrangement.
Well, right. That would mean there'd be either some kind of delusional issue or psychosis,
right.
which,
right.
that's a totally different issue
right.
for the estrangement.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not a healthy, functioning adult child and a parent. It's a very disorganized child. But it sounds like what you're pointing at, and I know that the book it does a really good job on two levels, on two orders, looking at attachment theory and how that plays out both for the adult parent of the adult child and for the child, and addresses that for the parent, and also adverse childhood experiences that the parent might have experienced, or they, I suppose, might have inadvertently provided to the child, neglect or trauma or things like that. And there's a lot of awakening and insight that education that the book provides. But maybe you can go into maybe how attachment might be underlying the pain that is experienced on both sides a little bit, if you'd like to.
Yeah. Sure. So the parent has an attachment style based on the parent's early experiences with the parent's caregivers. And that attachment style kind of activates whenever the parent is close to an important other person. And in many cases, the child will become a very important attachment figure for the parent. And if that parent has, say, experienced abandonment or rejection from important caregivers in the past, they will be super sensitive to anything that looks or feels or smells like abandonment or rejection from the child, even as we talked about the normal pulling away of being 21 and wanting to be more independent. The parent can really take that personally because they have attachment injuries that are getting triggered.
Okay, and so and if the child kind of like an anxious attachment, and if the child were raised by that parent, they might it be possible that they develop kind of a wound that makes them want to pull away and be more distant, say, and their attachment style is more dismissive. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that really sets up a very painful kind of dynamic in the relationship. But there's so much going on here that is not conscious.
Correct.
That is not well understood on either side. And that also is kind of what comes into play when the parent may look and say, I have no idea what my child is talking about. When he accuses me of this or that, or she says that this was true. It just wasn't, that's not my experience. But there may be things that are intergenerational that are so much a part of the family that they may be invisible to the parent. And these are things maybe that the child is complaining about.
And birth order, I think, plays a big role in that. Like you said, because the attachment needs are probably met more if the parent starts to kind of fall away from being so interactive with their children. It might be that the first child is doted upon more and is more secure in their attachment or has more of a connection to the parent, whereas the second born might be resentful because the mother wasn't there or there was a rift in the attachment to the main parent, usually the mother, right? And so the perspectives change. Like, I come from a family of 7. And if you talk about the slice of pies, I'm the youngest. I've heard all of the stories, and it's like, wow. Maybe this is why I became a psychologist, right? But it was like, wow. Were you at the dinner table when all of this was going on? With some of my siblings, it's kind of like, wow. Your perspective really is going to skew how you see things, right? As Goethe once said, we look for what we are seeking and we find it, and especially in attachments too, right? Yeah.
That's absolutely true. I'm just reading a book right now about attention, and attention grabs onto something and nothing else exists around it. Really. So you literally don't see things. It's like the gorilla in the middle of the basketball players.
Correct.
You literally don't see the gorilla if you're looking at who is passing the ball to whom. So,
exactly. Yeah,
things can happen for some people in the same household that are completely invisible to other members of the family.
Correct. Yeah, and yes, it is attention, and it's priming, right? As you can see, you can almost say that the ultimate priming, psychological priming, cognitively, is your first attachment, is in which the first 18 months where the inner working model of attachment develops, So, and that's going to play out later on. But it must really surprise the parents when this plays out and they're like, "Oh yeah, what happened?" Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I thought I was there, and that's not what I remember.
Yeah,
that's why validation is so important. You have got to assume that unless your child is, as you said before, completely psychotic, just checked out of reality, and let's hope that's not the case. You've got to assume that your child has just his own reality. He has his experience, and there is something to it. And so you want to validate that by just saying, I hear that, and I'm so sorry that that's what you experienced that's what you experienced. I don't remember that, but that does not mean that that's not what happened. So I hear you, and that's awful.
The book also seems to really address the fact that the parent needs to validate their perspective too, and learn how to validate themselves, right?
Right, because, the opposite of validation is judgment, criticism, and ultimately shame. And I think shame is the biggest hurdle for parents who are wanting to work on their relationship with their kids. Because there's like built-in shame. As soon as you become a parent, you're worried that you're not doing it right, or you're not doing well enough. And, everybody has stuff that they can look back on and say, well, I wish I'd done that differently. There's just such a lot of, there's just such an emphasis on being a good mom or a good dad to your kid. And what does that even look like? Your family is unique, but you want to be the best parent you can, and you know that there were times when you weren't the best, that you weren't at your best. And so all this shame is getting in the way. And when your kid then says, you know what, you were a terrible parent, you did this and you did that, well, the shame activates and says, oh my gosh, I can't even go there, because if I listen to that, I'm just going to implode. I'm going to just feel small and awful. So I cannot hear that. And that's how shame gets in the way of the parent saying, well, let me hear your perspective. Let me see what I can do to make some good repairs here.
Yeah, and so at the same time, you're dealing with that shame, but it might be compounded. We live in a society that's based on shame, right? We don't get a lot of encouragement or learn ways to handle shame or guilt, right? Early on,
that's exactly
it's
right.
a very punitive, and a lot of parents have a punitive, even though they're maybe not hurting their children physically. There's a kind of punitive edge to the way they perceive things and roll out their parenting skills, right?
Yeah, especially with authoritarian parenting. But yeah, shame is installed very early on, even with just normal parenting and normal schooling. Socializing children involves telling them, no, don't do that. That's not appropriate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? So when you socialize a kid, you put boundaries around them, you put limits, and you tell them, no, that's not okay. You can't do that. And the kid cannot distinguish between my behavior is bad and I am bad. It's just too fine a distinction for a very young child. And so the young child says, I'm only conditionally acceptable. I, not my behavior.
Right,
me.
yeah.
So we all have shame.
I think that I went to the Adler University, and to a certain degree I was indoctrinated into Adlerian principles. parenting, reparenting, and parenting of the adult child, and a child guidance and parenting classes was what he was all about, and it's kind of a tradition in that. And indeed, encouragement and being able to separate that difference between what makes a person feel shamed, them, rather than themselves, but like learning logical versus natural consequences, right? Like the logical consequences of social contracts, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but there are just situations where we need, I think, some kind of, I don't know what to call it, functional shame that keeps us from doing inappropriate things. Like, there may be no consequences.
Oh yeah,
to
there are consequences. Yeah.
To certain behaviors, maybe
Yeah.
the consequences are, not so bad, but still you don't really want to do them in polite company. So, I mean, it's very, very tricky to socialize someone outside of an Adlerian education program.
Well, I mean, I think,
without-
however you want to slice it, some kind of a parent education program would be very nice. Be good if we had more of those floating around. Yeah.
and the other challenge is, even if you know exactly what to do and the words to say, you're still dealing with all of the stuff that you're carrying inside, only some of which is conscious, right? You're still dealing with your own issues that might make it absolutely impossible to use those words in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, and yes,
so
precisely.
It's huge. Everybody's in the same boat on this one.
Absolutely.
So even though if you're estranged from an adult child, you may feel uniquely inadequate in some way or uniquely criticized, really, I mean, every parent is somewhat in the same boat with not having done a perfect job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, I'm curious, like the book talks about emotional bank accounts, right? That's a cool concept.
Right.
Can you maybe roll that out a little bit more of how you explained it in this context?
This was an idea by a guy called Ivan Bazarmeny-Nagy, who posited that basically what happens to us when we're children gets paid forward. So if my parents needed me to be there for them and be a kind of step and fetch it, make dinner, be kind of an adult taking care of them, then when I grow up and have kids of my own, that my bank account has had nothing but withdrawals out of it. Now I look to my kid and I say, all right, it's your turn. You do for me now, because I did this for my parents, so now you're going to do this for me. That's how that works. I need some deposits in the bank account.
That does not sound like a very good banker. But I could see why. One might think that way. But yeah, okay. And so it's this kind of chain of parentified child. Parentified a child, like
it's a chain of
generational. Yes, generational. Yeah.
Yeah, what happens between parents and children? What does this look like? What do mothers do? What do daughters do? What do fathers do? What do sons do? And then when I become the other, then I have the expectation that I will do this and you will do that, whatever it is, whether it's parentification or something else.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and that can play out, and I guess we could say that could cause a lot of resentment.
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, because a new person coming into that chain doesn't know how this goes and might not be willing to participate. And that causes resentment on both sides. What are you trying to get me to do here? And why won't you do this?
Mm-hmm. So these kind of come into the realm of like unmet needs and reparenting. One of the chapters is on kind of reparenting with your adult child and the unmet needs. But I think it's kind of a double-sided coin, as all coins have, right? Two sides to it. Mm-hmm. How does this roll out in sessions or in even if you're doing like psychoeducation? I know that I looked at your website. You have a kind of reconnection club where people can learn these skills and look for a therapist, I suppose, to help integrate these skills. But let's say in your therapy practice, how would this reparenting of the adult and the unmet needs of the adult parent be fulfilled, and how does it roll out as for them reparenting their adult child?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of emphasis on self-compassion and personal growth. Basically, you parent others the way you parent yourself. If I am compassionate with myself, if my self-esteem is healthy, if I think I'm basically okay, if I allow myself to screw up without criticizing myself, then that is kind of basically how I will parent other people. Although there may be a layer laying over it of, well, how did my parents parent me? And I may either parent somewhat similarly to them, or I may go in the other direction and say, I do not want to parent the way I was parented. So I think it's a combination of self-compassion, personal growth, and also recognizing some of those things that might have been intergenerational and unknown, just kind of invisible in the psyche. Expectations about what parents do and what children do. And once you know what those expectations are and you go, aha, this is how I was parented, or, oh, no wonder my father acted this way. Look at how he was raised. And the more you understand that, the more you can kind of wiggle around in there and maybe get out from under it a little bit, combined with the personal growth and self-compassion. Really, self-compassion, I believe, is the cornerstone for parents who want to repair their relationship with their kids. And I don't want people to think that's a platitude. Because it could sound like, oh, you have to love yourself before you can love others. It's true. It's true.
It sounds almost like you have to work on helping them repair attachment disturbances
within themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's very heavy. That doesn't come out. The book doesn't come out and explicitly say that, but I think that's the underlying kind of right.
I tried to make it as much like a personal growth book as possible,
Absolutely.
but of course, I wanted to also include the practical tips that I have learned from also working with estranged adult children. There are lots of practical tools. There are lots of generalizations that you can make about, contact and stuff like that. So that's in there too. But underlying the whole thing is you need to look out for you and take care of you and parent you.
Right.
And get your needs met.
Yeah. And
I hope that's throughout.
Yeah. And so also, I think with attachment problems, there's going to be this, in some respect, either to distance oneself typically, or cling towards, or try too enmeshed versus too distance, right? Disentangled.
Yep.
And you need to find that balance somewhere, right?
Right, and I see both of those styles in parents, and you might think, oh, the avoidant parents just kind of run away and don't contact their kids, and maybe they have it easier, but they don't. I mean, they are equally in pain, and they may reach out, but if they get hurt, then they may withdraw more quickly than an anxious parent who reaches out, and can't help himself or herself.
I know you did mention, it seems like the book puts an emphasis on that avoidant attachment style as it plays out with parents, right? Like how it might have played out, or is that with the children?
Well, I mean, the attachment was really discussed in just the one chapter, and there are certain things that research has found. I think the anxious type was the one more likely to have negative outcomes, difficulty parenting. Right.
Okay, but the avoidant might, if you have an anxious child with an avoidant temperament and an avoidant parent, then you have a mismatch there. Right.
Right, and that's something that I don't see as much because I don't work with parents who they have cut off their children and the children want a relationship. I work with parents who want the relationship and are being rebuffed by their children.
I see. Well, and also I think that a lot of self-help books on attachment and a lot of people you see in therapy, they tend to be more anxious because they're reaching out for help.
Right.
They're distressed, and they know how to mention that they're distressed and tell themselves and reach out to someone. So, yeah, a lot more of an anxiety pervasive in the population.
But as I said, the avoidant ones are also very, very much in pain, and so they are also in the Reconnection Club and working on reaching out to.
So here's a good question, I think at least. How do you connect with somebody who's avoidant and has a hard time maybe seeing their interactions with people having created suffering, their own and their children's?
Can you say that?
How do you, like, it's more difficult to reach out to somebody who's avoidant, wouldn't you say? Like in therapy. So like how does that transpire versus how you would connect with an anxiously attached parent in therapy?
Well, I don't usually have information about the attachment style of the adult child, but I do assume
I'm talking about the parent. The parent.
Oh,
like if you have if I know you don't see a lot of avoidant parents in therapy, right? But when you do, and they're trying to work on this reconnection, correct?
Yeah, then it's a matter of helping them find the courage to move toward rather than away from. Yeah. Because in many cases, what is needed is for them to put themselves out there with maybe an apology or a question or something that they are not, that they're scared to put out there because they are afraid to be rejected again. They've already when they come to me, they've already been rejected once or numerous times, and they're just afraid to reach out again. And so crafting the right message that does resonate with how they feel, but is also likely to be more effective, to be heard, to be taken in by the child, that's the task for them. And also just finding the courage. And sometimes they have to wait a little while until they feel stronger before they can reach out.
And so a lot of this is you're kind of teaching people communication patterns, a lot like you might, it seems like in like a couples therapy or a family therapy. So what are some of the communication patterns that you need to correct, and how does one go about correcting them?
Well, I think the most important thing I teach is validation. It is not at all a natural thing. Just like active listening for most of us does not come naturally. Most communication, I think, in families certainly is just done without much thought. You know, you don't really think before you speak. That's part of the value of family, is you could just let your hair down and be yourself. And so, the communication is very unfiltered. And so the first thing that, if you've been cut off, you'll want to do is develop a filter and develop a strategy of communication that hopefully aligns with a new way of being. Because, I can help people craft a good message, but if that message is not something they can, if that's not a talk they can walk, right? If that's not a talk they can walk, then it's going to be not effective in the long run. Because even if an adult child responds to a really good and validating letter, if they then get together, does the parent have the tools and the person hood, or are they in a place where they can bring that validation into an in-person meeting? That's where the rubber meets the road. That's why there's personal growth and change that needs to happen within the parent before they even get to where they want to be, which is closer to the child.
Do you ever, I know sometimes in therapy, there might be either a deceased relative that the patient wants to write a letter to express themselves and externalize and work on their emotions and grapple with them, wrestle with the angel, so to speak. And then also a patient may well want to say something to a person they're estranged from, knowing full well that person may not accept the communication. So oftentimes a therapist may say, why don't you write a letter and seal it up and put it in a file cabinet, or you can keep it here and I'll put it in my file cabinet. Or you can do a ritual. You can throw it in the garbage. You can burn it and send it off into the ether or whatever. Do you do any of these kind of practice runs with some of your clients in communication?
Absolutely.
Because it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
It's scary.
To put a letter out there and actually send it?
In these situations for these people. Yeah.
It's risky. Yeah, it feels risky and it feels dangerous. And in a way it is. You know, if there are a lot of people I work with who have sent multiple apologies that have fallen on deaf ears, and I don't get to see what those look like. You know, I don't really. How was that apology? I mean, I just created a course for our club that is, you know, what are the elements of a good apology? How do you do that? But one thing we do in the club is people will post, here's a draft of a letter I'm thinking of sending, and then we'll all kind of work on it together, and we'll ask, you know, questions about it. What did you mean by this? Is it possible your daughter will feel this way when she reads the sentence? And, you know, half the time they'll say, I've decided to call instead, or I'm not going to write right now, or I'm going to start from scratch, or you know, the process is really helpful. Just writing, because in writing the letter, you really also think about and feel and kind of live what's behind it. So the process is super valuable. The writing process.
Do you recommend doing it with a stylus or a pen or pencil versus on like a word pad or a document?
You mean if you're going to send it, or
just as for themselves? Yeah.
Oh, I don't really know if there's any research on that, but I just kind of tell people whatever you feel, whatever you want to do. Some people seem to be more.
I know that as far as like memory, like they suggest, like if you're in a lecture, you should not type or record the lecture. You should write it because there's that connectivity and the neural pathways are actually grown to that process, right? Yeah. So I wonder if that might also be something that would help in a therapeutic letter.
Possibly, yeah.
Although unless your penmanship is not like mine, I wouldn't recommend sending a letter that was handwritten.
Well, the reason a handwritten letter might be good if you write it very carefully.
Correct.
Even if you write it very carefully, it may slow the reader down. And I feel like letters, anything, reads better if you don't like zip through it. Zip, 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 zip. Because when you zip through something, it comes across as more abrupt than the words came out of the writer's mind.
Correct. Yeah.
Handwriting can slow the reader down.
Yeah, you can wind up projecting a lot of stuff onto a situation that's not there.
Yes. I know that because I've had people read emails to me from other people saying, "Dear so-and-so, I hope you had a good vacation." Can you imagine? You're like, and they really, really feel that's a mean email or that it had a bad intent. And when I hear the words, I don't at all get that tone.
Yeah. Exactly. I remember, just as an aside, I remember back in the day, my mother used to send letters to her sister-in-law, my aunt, and my aunt would send letters back, and they both had really good penmanship, and there was time taken to actually think about the thoughts, and there was a lot more, I think, emotional connection in what they were saying, you know, and also the time that somebody actually made this thing. They sent this thing, you know, they took the time to take it to the post office box or and that's kind of lacking in our communication these days.
That is lacking. Type stuff. Yeah, it does have a more personal touch to it. I also suggest that parents keep anything that they send short, because when you cut somebody off and you don't want to have any contact, and you get a letter from them that's 6 pages long, single-spaced, double-sided, you're not inclined to read it. But when you cut somebody off and they send you a very brief thing, maybe a paragraph on one page, you know, then you might be curious enough, and it's short enough that you might, in fact, read it word for word instead of skimming 6 pages.
You're correct. Yeah. Well, I would say, speaking about the connection through letter writing, I do believe that the book itself, I don't know if this is a good segue, but I think the book itself comes across as very compassionate. It's very readable, and it's very useful. And as I was saying to you before we started recording, I believe it's going to fill a gap, both in the literature and for clinical resources for people. I wish I had had this book 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, that's wonderful to hear you say. I hope that people do find it useful, and I did want to infuse those pages with compassion, because I know that people who read the book are people in pain.
Yes.
And so I want them to feel like they're sitting with a therapist and that they are accepted and understood, and that they're basically okay and lovable as people, and they just need a little bit of help with this very painful problem.
Yeah. Well, is there, speaking of therapists, are there any characteristics that a person should look for specifically in a therapist for this problem?
Yes. I do want to say a lot of times people tell me, I can't find an estrangement specialist in my town. And what I usually say is, you really, really don't need one. You know, consult with me, go to the Reconnection Club if you have specific questions about the estrangement. But for therapy, find somebody who is compassionate, who does not make you feel judged or criticized. That's really the most important quality that you want to look for in somebody, is they accept your feelings. I've heard people say, I told my therapist that I'm not proud of my daughter, and I felt like she was judging me. She brought it up a few sessions later, and I really felt criticized. And that's not good.
Right.
You know, that's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are judging themselves every day. They do not need to be judged by somebody who is hired to help them. What they need is to find compassion for themselves. Because once you really manage to actually do that, then you absolutely naturally feel more compassionate toward this person who's cutting you off and whose behavior is hurting you.
Self-compassion, I believe, is probably the key element to good parenting and secure attachment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, is there a way for people to reach you? I know there is. I'm leading you on with this one. Where can people reach you, Tina Gilbertson, and where can they find your book, and where can they connect with the Reconnection Club?
Thank you. Yeah, the book is Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child. It's available wherever books are sold. They can find out about me and all my services and everything I do at tinagilbertson.com. Mm-hmm. And if they're interested in the Reconnection Club is an online school, whereas the book is the textbook. The Reconnection Club is the school where you apply what you learned in the book. So ideally, you read the book, and if you would like some support and some extra information, then you would go to the school and continue working in the company of other parents who are also working on relationship repair.
And is the school and the book something you could also recommend to children who have estranged themselves from their parents?
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
You must be the parent of an estranged adult child in order to be a member of the Reconnection Club. It is focused on parents specifically. Mm-hmm. I am sorry to have to say that, because I know that adult children are very much in pain as well. And I'm hopeful that they can more easily find a therapist who will support them.
Maybe there's an exploration of the other half of that coin for you, and you'd be the perfect person to flush that out, maybe in some other manner. I know you have your hands full, but I think you would. You'd be able to write the other book. I feel pretty confident.
Well, yeah, interesting. Thank you for saying so. And I do occasionally hear from estranged adult children, and they do actually schedule consultations with me from time to time, even though they know that my work is in support of parents,
Yeah.
they will, and I do my best for them as well when they do come by.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. The book is available. It is Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child. It's from New World Library. I recommend that other therapists pick it up and other consumers out there who are in need of this kind of information. And if there's a therapist out there who is working with a parent who has an estranged adult child, can they send them your way for the Reconnect Club for a kind of adjunct to what they're doing and working on?
Oh, I'd be grateful if they did.
Okay.
And I'm also happy to consult with therapists who are working with parents. Mm-hmm. I have some quick tips that I do offer therapists who are working with these folks. So please feel free to get in touch.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tina Gilbertson. All the best, and we hope to have you back on sometime.
That would be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to us at iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. This podcast is for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. All material, copyright, The Psychology Talk Podcast. Music is provided by the band Serenati.